In 1951, the American painter and graphic artist Robert Rauschenberg released a series of works called The White Paintings. As the Rauschenberg Foundation puts it, this is a series of modular canvases, painted entirely white, which reflect changes in light and the chance effects of shadows in the surrounding space. One or more white paintings were hung as set decor for John Cage's theatre piece No. 1 at Black Mountain College in 1952. Cage attributed these works as being the inspiration for his signature silent composition 433. 433 is a composition in which the performer or performers lay down their instruments for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. The resulting ambient sound, the murmur of a crowd, the noise of the everyday, becomes the song. It is, in part, intended to invite the listener to enjoy a moment of uncommon communal silence, and, more pointedly, to reflect. The white paintings are the same. They are, quite literally, blank canvases. Being perfectly white, they reflect the ambience of their surroundings. Light, dust, shadow. With the latter, the viewer is cast onto the painting. You are projected into the piece of art which you are being asked to consider. This is a good summation from The Junction Journal, which is a weekly blog put together by the interns at the English Majors Counselling Office in Brooklyn College. Quote, "This painting demands a certain amount of consideration, mindfulness, and interaction that is distinct from viewing other paintings. There contains no singular image to focus on, other than subtle changes that are created by light, and even by the observer itself. This painting is not just an exercise in perception, but an exercise in challenging the observer's role in the world. No longer is the observer an external spectator, but essentially a component that is as integrated to the canvas as the paint itself." I'm bringing all this up because a brief write-up of the white paintings is included in a book that you can find and read in the game that we're talking about today. No, I'd never heard of the white paintings before. I'm not going to pretend that I'm as cultured as I fancy myself to be. But the parallel was immediately clear. In this game, you play a character who is a blank canvas, who can project themselves into objects around their environment, taking on their form and characteristics in order to interact with the world, to explore, to investigate, to play. What's more, this game uses that idea to ask you, the viewer, the player, to reflect. It asks you a few questions. How are you living? How are you using your time? Now, these are challenging questions, which can be hard to reckon with. But here, they are being asked in the most fun, engaging, and charming game of the year. Hi, I'm Andrew. Welcome to Dialogue Tree. This is episode 22. Meet Lululu Entertainment, the story of Henry Halfhead. Henry Halfhead is a sandbox adventure game released on 16th of September 2025 on Steam, Epic, PS5 and Nintendo Switch. It was developed by Lululu Entertainment and published by Pop Agenda, who kindly provided a review code for this episode. That's the first one on this show, so that's nice. Thanks. And I should tell you up top that later in the show, I talk to two members of the Lululu team about this game. We go over the genesis of it, specifics such as the gameplay, visuals and sound, plus the theming, the unexpectedly touching narrative arc, of Henry and their journey. If you want to skip the review and go straight to the interview, you can. Chapters are in the show notes. But before we talk about the game, we're going to talk about the game. This weird, wacky, and wonderful game. In Henry Halfhead, you control Henry, who is half ahead. They are able to scoot around on the floor with a decent and amusingly unexplained jump, but in order to effect forward progress, they must make use of their one unique ability, the power to possess objects around the world. You can jump into basically anything you can see: furniture, cake, a rubber duck, a toilet, a legally distinct Game Boy. It's the latest in a rich line of games, from Geist to Ghost Trick to Mario Odyssey to Haunty, that make fun or interesting use of the idea of possessing environmental objects. You start as a baby, confined to their cot. Guided by the narration of Leander Schneeberger, you work your way out by working your way out, and proceed to explore, engage, and experiment with the environment of your childhood bedroom, the game gently but pointedly encouraging you to visit as much chaos upon the world as you are able. You can possess pencils, the entire bedroom becoming your canvas. You can possess building blocks in order to build a tower. You can possess a xylophone and play to your heart's content, so long as you turn off the nearby baby monitor. Now, every time you complete a microtask, the game zooms out, the camera swings around, and a new area within the room pops into view, your next destination. You are compelled to make use of each area, to make use of the attributes of every environment, in order to unlock the next. Now, I won't spoil too much, but as an example, you complete this bedroom-based tutorial and then move on to the kitchen to celebrate Henry's birthday. Here, your goal is ostensibly to set the table for the party, but you can, if you want, open all the presents and eat all the cake. You probably should. These environments and these goals stretch out. Henry grows up. You go to school together. You enter the workplace together. You'll bounce on beds. You'll find batteries and cartridges for that legally distinct Game Boy. You'll try to get through class, and you'll try to get through the workday. You'll enter life together. What I like about the gameplay of Henry Halfhead is the fluidity of it. Every object has its own properties, its own physics, but unlike other games that do so, these are not implemented in a way that is obstructive to control or enjoyment. You are never prevented from completing a task, or simply exploring, by deliberately wonky movement. The closest the game comes to this is with the batteries you occasionally need to manipulate. Their movement is limited, but working out how to bunny hop them into place is the light touch puzzle here. Likewise, you are not punished by simply being Henry. They are quick and easy to handle. The net effect of this is that experimentation, jumping between objects, is never a chore. It's swift and it's intuitive. This fun-first gameplay is a real hook for Henry. I often struggle to find motivation to check items off a list in sandbox games such as this, as there's usually some impediment baked into the inputs, usually for comic effect, that hampers the fun of movement just enough to be noticeable. That is not the case here. You can absolutely fly through the areas. Some tasks require multiple steps. Planting and watering some seeds, cooking a decent meal, all require a degree of busy work that could be off-putting, but it isn't, due to the finely tuned movement and control scheme. You can tap A to quickly hop into your nearest or most recent object, or hold that button down to highlight all the possessable objects in your field of view, then selecting the one you want with the left stick. This is a smart and neat confluence of theme and control. Henry Halfhead is a game about the importance of play, the importance of not taking life too seriously, to revel in fun and creativity. It's an impulse that's embedded into the game design, and it's all the better for it. Now quickly, for those interested, there is a co-op mode. You can activate this at any point. The game switches to a vertical split screen, with player 2 simply taking the role of a second Henry. They have the same abilities, the same responsibilities, with none of the limitations often imposed in such modes. To draw some very predictable comparisons, Mario Galaxy and Odyssey and Kirby and the Forgotten Land all have co-op modes that give the second player too little agency, the mode clearly being an afterthought to appeal to gullible parents, hi there, who think those modes will provide long-term entertainment and bonding. They don't, because they pointedly treat player 2 as a child, making very grand assumptions about skill level and tolerance for that lack of agency. Donkey Kong Bonanza goes too far the other way, giving too much to the second player, the resulting mess proving the point. These games don't really work as co-op experiences. Henry Halfhead is different. The two players can operate independently or cooperatively. The sandboxes are big enough for you to not step on each other, but not so big that you can't connect quickly when you want to. The gameplay is simple enough for young children to pick up and enjoy messing around with, while offering enough to older players able to explore and experiment to keep them entertained in tandem. Personally, I think the way co-op is implemented here is basically perfect for this type of game. Would you like to hear what it sounds like when two 5-year-olds play Henry Halfhead for the first time? No? Sorry.
What is Roddy wearing? I'm Black Monster. Oh, it went down. Oh my God! Ours is coming! He's coming! Go! I'm a cookie! I can't see you! I can't see I'm a cookie. You! Where are you? Said spot the cookie and you will see me.
Visually, Henry Halfhead presents as simple but striking. Bright, colourful, low-poly sprites amplified by the negative space around the game world. Each environment is made up of only a few discrete areas, surrounded by a void of white. It's not quite as terrifying as it sounds, and keeps the game focused on the task in hand. There are nice little touches everywhere. The pops of confetti, the uncannily accurately recreated blurry smear of crayon on the wall, the way Henry's endearing wide eyes are integrated into each transformation. And we'll talk more about all of that later. The audio. Henry Halfhead is guided by a narrator. Let's listen.
Here's Henry, already opening presents? What bold curiosity. Whenever Henry feels stuck, they imagine life is a video game and pretend to press a button to show hints. In a way, this drawing resembles Henry's parents. Oh, they will be so mad. Back in the crib, will Henry behave this time? Yeah, I thought so. So much time has passed. How would it feel to be a big old tree?
Like the game itself, it's breezy and charming, and if it reminds you of British writer and comedian Danny Wallace's narration for 2012 indie landmark Thomas Was Alone, I think you are an observant and cultured soul, as they both inhabit a similarly remote but compassionate space, an empathetic god figure. Again, we'll talk more about that later, and so, on to the music. Except not. The music in this game, in the composed songs, and the sound design in the ambient audio, from the radio to the TV to the dynamic effects, is of a quantity and quality deserving of more time and space than I can devote to on this episode. Suffice to say, I think the soundtrack, in its entirety, as a complete piece of work, is something else. It runs to 4 volumes on Bandcamp, or 4 virtual discs on Steam. The composer is Lucien Guy Montandon. They don't know it yet, but I'll be cycling back to the soundtrack on a future episode. So, we'll finish up this review later, but for now, we should throw to the people responsible for this game. This is Tim and Aaron.
Hello everyone, I'm Tim and I'm responsible for the art at Lululu. I did the art direction on Henry Halfhead and our previous game Boomerang. I'm doing lots of modeling and designs and all that kind of fun stuff.
Hi, I'm Aaron, also part of Lululu. On Henry Halfhead, I mostly took over the gameplay programming, and as we're an indie team, taking over all sorts of tasks here and there. And next to Lululu, I worked at a VR AR company called Ateo for a couple of years, where I designed and developed such VR and AR apps.
Lululu Entertainment is a Zurich-based game studio founded by 3 friends, Aaron, Tim and Leander, who met while studying game design at Zurich University of the Arts. They formed the studio following their graduation in 2019, and they released their first game, Boomerang, in 2021, before proceeding to develop Henry Halfhead. However, Henry has actually been in the works for a lot longer than that. I wanted to talk to the team about this game, and they were kind enough to offer their time, and so we caught up and talked in greater detail about the life of Henry, how they came to be, how the game, visuals and sound evolved, the wider narrative, and the idea of this game being part of an emerging genre, the silly sandbox. This is what we talked about. Hi guys, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. First of all, how are you both doing? How were your weekends?
Thanks for having us. My weekend was nice. We did have a big party on Friday. That was super awesome. Taking a moment to celebrate what we have done with friends and family. And on Saturday, I took some time to clean up from the party. and on Sunday, I could really just relax and regain some energy after this exciting and also a bit stressful week.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Andrew. My weekend was also really nice. I enjoyed our party a lot. And on Saturday, I had another party of a friend of mine. Yeah, so it was a very good weekend. But yeah, Sunday, I was resting and a bit tired.
I can well imagine. That is, well-deserved celebrations because you have just released your game, Henry Halfhead, which we'll be talking about today. So congratulations on that. So there are two elements of the development of the game that I want to touch on, as I think they're quite inspiring and they should be highlighted at a time when like studio closures and layoffs and this sort of general feeling of a lack of support has kind of permeated gaming discourse for a couple of years. First of all, Henry Halfhead was initially dreamt up as part of a game design studies module, I believe. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So we initially developed the very first concept for Henry Halfhead back in 2018. And like you said, it was part of our game design studies at ZHDK in Zurich. And we had the task, it was a character design module, and we had the task to come up with a character that is that has a superpower but also a disability at the same time. And then we came up with this character that is only half a head and has no body, but can use any object as a body.
It's such an unusual idea, but it works so well. And the second element of the development of the game that I noticed on your website, because I think it's important to highlight that there are support networks out there for small developers. You received a cultural grant to help with the production of the game, and I believe it's now part of a mentorship program, which is part of the Swiss Games Hub. Could you tell us a little how that came about and how the game is now being used in this mentorship program?
When we completed our studies in 2019, we were approached by Philomena Schwab from Strayphon Studio and Sebastian Tobler from Ateo, the VR company where I eventually worked at. And they had this idea to create, together with some other people in the scene of Zurich, to create this Swiss Game Hub, an incubator where they could help other upcoming studios to share knowledge, provide financially accessible workspace, and asked us whether we want to be some of the first people to get a workplace there. So we already started right after our studies working on Boomerang inside this Swiss Game Hub, where we were granted free workspaces and mentorship in the form of meetings where we got taught the ins and outs of do-it-yourself indie game marketing, basically.
I'm glad you brought up Boomerang, because now I don't need to do an awkward segue into that. That's your first game as a development studio, and it's a competitive couch multiplayer game. Henry Halfhead is obviously quite different to this. So, did your experience with Boomerang inform the development of Henry Halfhead in any way? Did you learn anything from that experience that you'd like to repeat, or did you learn anything that you sort of wanted to avoid?
Mainly that it's single player first. Henry Halfhead. Of course, we knew that very early on with Boomerang that it would be hard to market a local multiplayer only game. But we also knew that it was a game that we were really passionate about and other people really liked, and it would be also a big part of it would be this learning experience of finishing up a small game, a rather small game, and just learning what it means to produce a game from beginning to end, and also do the marketing and the business side of it.
And the porting to Nintendo Switch is also something that we first did with Boomerang and now did again for Henry.
Yeah, what is that experience like? I've heard some developers say that it can be quite a challenge some of the hoops that you need to jump through to port from PC or other platforms to Switch. Can you speak to what that's like dealing with sort of Nintendo's process for that?
For Boomerang, it was a bit special because it was our first time doing this, and of course our first time creating a complete game like that. Getting access to the development kit and the materials at all was a bit challenging at first. Back then, I think we had a meeting with some folks of Nintendo and asked for a dev kit, and it took them quite a while to get back to us or to eventually offer one.
I think in the end we got a reply on an email that we sent to like a public Nintendo email address, and it took them like 8 months to get back to us or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think it's easier these days, yeah. But back then, at first we thought, okay, it's not coming to the Switch.
But then it did.
By some miracle. That's very consistent with what people are saying about getting dev kits for Switch 2 now. That's the biggest hurdle to overcome. So, to Henry Halfhead, there's 3 elements of the game that I'd really like to focus on. Those being the gameplay, the visuals, and the voiceover. But first, I'd like to throw this to you both. How would you categorize or describe this game to anyone who hasn't seen it?
We generally say that Henry is a sandbox adventure game. And I think that description fits pretty well because it has a lot of freedom. It has these playground elements, which, lets player express themselves and play around a lot. Henry also features a linear story. So there's this story that guides players through the different sandbox elements or levels. And it's quite a unique mixture, I would say. And it's also a challenge to describe the game.
The word puzzle game gets thrown around quite sometimes, and we're always a bit torn. Like sometimes we say, yeah, it's puzzle-y-ish, but not really a puzzle game.
Yeah, I get the phrase puzzle game brings with it sort of certain baggage. It puts you in mind of something very specific, like you're being challenged to solve something. I quite like the idea of thinking of Henry Halfhead as a puzzle game because you're finding interactions. That's sort of the puzzle element. You're like finding how to use things, finding synergies between particular items, which is a good point to bring me to that first question that I had for you about gameplay. The main mechanic in this game is like possession and taking control of various objects around the world, finding ways to interact with them and finding ways to get the objects to interact with each other. Now, was there a process for how you came up with these transformations? Did you brainstorm ideas, or did you have the story written and you implemented the transformations around that?
A bit from both sides, I think, yeah. I think one of the tasks that will come up in the next weeks, months, is like archiving all our notes and sketches and drafts that are lying around. At one point, very early on, we really started just throwing ideas for interesting objects and interactions onto these little papers. And so we collected a big stack of them to just start prototyping interesting objects and interactions. But at that point, we didn't have a story yet to create. What we did have is the constraint that was clear very early on, that we want to limit it to very everyday, mundane objects and not go to a very fantastical scenario with it.
But then I would say that after this trial period, we quickly were doing a lot of story writing and story drafting. And once we kind of had the core of what we wanted to tell in the game, we developed a blockout version where we basically did like these little test levels which told the story parts that we planned for the different segments. And in these levels, then we came up with a lot of ideas on how to tell the story parts and what objects do we want to tell these story parts.
I can see an amazing like director's cut version of Henry Halfhead in the future that includes all of these notes and transformations that didn't make the cut.
That would be great, yeah.
I was going to ask you this later, but this seems like a perfect time to ask now. Were there any particular transformations that didn't make it into the game because they were either too wild, too wacky, or for whatever other reason?
toy train in the childhood level.
A toy train?
Toy train.
Oh, wow.
I think at one point we had ideas for a whole like winter sports level thing that just popped into my mind, like Henry the snowboard and stuff like that, or Henry the snowman.
I can see the eyes on the snowman already.
Yeah, like building your own little snowman would be very cute.
Also, what often came up was the idea of a computer in the home level, where you could maybe even like go into the operating system and turn into a cursor and so forth. But I think that was quite out there.
There's your DLC.
Yeah.
Yeah, Henry on the internet.
Henry, oh, wow. Yeah. There's so many different ways that you could take it. Different like avenues of his life you could explore.
Yeah, that was also a big challenge with the whole concept. Like everybody we talked to about the game had so many ideas and objects that they would have liked to see in the game. And so like choosing and deciding for what we actually can and want to show was a big challenge.
I guess you're trying to tell the particular story, keep it focused as much as you want to implement every fun idea you have. You don't want it to spiral off too far and for it to become too lengthy an experience.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I can see why it would be quite frustrating. You want to like implement something that's really fun to you, but you have to cut it. So, and another thing that struck me about the game was the physics in it. Every object like has its own physics, some of which are very specific. I'm thinking of like the pencils and the batteries. They have this sort of like, very specific and quite limited movement, but none of the transformations ever really feel like they're working against you. And the same is true of Henry himself. You say that the idea is for him to have a superpower, but also a disability that limits him. And what I like is how when you are just Henry, his abilities are reduced, but he is nice and fast and easy to control, which means the player never feels punished for moving out of a particular transformation. So it makes it easier to just like switch around and experiment, which I really like. And this runs counter to a lot of other games that employ physics engines, because a lot of those games, they do so to make control difficult for whatever reason. Was that fluidity of control always part of the game design, or did you ever try to implement more challenging physics? What do you think of games that do that?
I think it was never the idea or the goal of creating challenging physics. We try to incorporate like interesting, playful movement in physics where we could. But I think most of the differences in movement come from just tweaks in jump heights, the size of the objects themselves, movement speeds, and then just these few hero objects that have totally different movesets, like rolling around or flying around as a paper plane.
Yeah, I think it was important to us to have it easily controllable. It's like similar to the puzzle topic, like we didn't really want to oppose a real challenge for two players. We want them to have a fluid and flowy experience with Henry.
Yeah, I got a bit worried when I saw that, these things have different physics. Like, is there going to be something that's so wonky that it makes it really hard to manipulate something into a space that you need to be? But it never was. I think that's great credit. I think it makes it just a really fun play. Like, leading on from that, so Henry Halfhead, it shares some characteristics with a few games that have released over the last few years that I think sort of speak to this an emerging genre. We've got games like Untitled Goose Game, A Short Hike, and Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip. They all present these sort of playful, silly sandboxes where the emphasis is on playful experimentation to discover interesting interactions that are either part of progress or just to like make you laugh. What's your response to that? Like, do you think this is a new genre or a trend that we're seeing? Do you think there are any other ways of defining these types of game? And why do you think this kind of game has become popular in recent years?
I just thought of whether it would be maybe a bit of a counter movement to maybe the more formulaic nature of AAA games that you already know from the beginning, like what you're gonna get in terms of gameplay, and that some indie games maybe try more to give you this toy box of wonder, of finding out little details.
I was also thinking in that direction, that it's just really an interesting player experience to have a world and you can go find out with what you can interact with and in what kind of ways can you interact with objects and NPCs. Yeah, a lot of a big invitation for experiments.
I liked Henry Halfhead and responded to it so positively, because I think it puts you as an adult, as a cynical adult, really effectively in the mindset of like who you were when you first started playing games, sort of sense of like of wonder, this like weird and crazy world that you're seeing, and that affects lessons over time. I think games like yours and the other ones I spoke to earlier, they are really effective, like new styles of recapturing that sense of experimentation and wonder. I really think that's like positive for Henry Halfhead.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Yeah. Thank you.
So that brings us on to, we talked briefly about like the theming and the story earlier. I'd like to touch on that in greater detail now, specifically like the more human side of this game. So like the chaos that you leave in Henry's wake. I like that when you finish sort of a given section, given chapter of the game, the camera sort of zooms out and allows you to take in all of the chaos. I recognize these rooms. Like I've walked into a lot of them. I think part of that's why I've responded so well to the game, because it allows me to be the agent of chaos rather than the one who's tidying it all up. So thank you for that. So like that detail, as well as like the overall theming of the game, like the overarching narrative, are two things that spoke to me. I detected like a certain melancholy and reflectiveness, like for how quickly time passes and for how quickly life forces you to stop playing. So are you able to share like where that side of Henry Halfhead came from? Does that come from experiences that you've had or anywhere else?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely something that we or I experienced growing up and entering the adult working life. That just adult life and work is consuming. It takes a lot of time, and to me, it's really important to slow down a bit and try to take time to appreciate simple things in life and to have fun. Yeah, to experiment and be playful.
I think it was one of the very early sparks with this concept of Henry that I thought was really interesting, when just turning into a mundane apple, that something like that could be so playful. And then, our decision that Henry doesn't need to turn into a spaceship and shoot lasers in a, I don't know, galactic war. And that could also be the topic of the story, to have fun with simple everyday life scenarios.
Yeah, I think it tells a very human story. It's very relatable, and I think that's something that some people might overlook if they're just casually like glancing at the game. And this one is like specifically for Tim. So in an interview you did with Tucker at Backlog Banter, which I really enjoyed, you mentioned that the visual style of the game was kept simple, like partially out of necessity, as you're like the only one working on it. Can you speak to what there are any specific influences on the visual style of this game?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I think one inspiration for the style is definitely Untitled Goose Game, with its flat colors, or games like Donut County. It's like this cartoony, clean look that we really enjoyed. And then we made it our own by using a very specific color palette made out of these pastel colors that I'm still really happy about. And also with the shader, we pushed it a bit more into its own unique direction. And I think also the void space really helps with the distinct look, like having all these objects separated in the void space creates a unique aesthetic.
So coming on to the third element that I wanted to focus on for the game, which was the voiceover, which is performed by Leander. I believe he's like sort of the third core member of your development team. Yeah, he's not a professional voice actor, but this is really good. Like, it's really good voiceover. And you mentioned in another interview, I think it was with Backlog Banter again, that an influence for this was the Stanley Parable. Now, that game implements the voiceover in quite a different way. It's there to like really mess with you, to make you a bit uncomfortable, and to sort of point out and then subvert the expectations of video games and game design. The tone of Henry Halfhead is obviously quite a bit different to that. Now, did you have the tone of the story and the narrative established from the start, or did it evolve during the writing process? Did it start closer to the Stanley Parable? Did it start in a different place to where it ended up?
I think it was definitely an evolving process that grew during development. And one thing that we at some point decided to aim for was this a bit more distanced, almost like a nature documentary style. We thought that would be really funny as a contrast to the big chaos players create during gameplay. But I would say that the narrator I think it came out a bit more hearty than that. Like, yeah, you can feel some emotions in the narrations.
So, what people may not realize about the game, or might even get overlooked, like in a review, I thought, is that there's a lot of hidden references to other media in the game, and it's mostly conveyed through like books that you can find and read. There's a lot of these, but a couple that stood out to me were there was a book that referenced Robert Rauschenberg's white paintings, and another that references the Trojan Room coffee pot, which is the subject of the internet's first webcam. I'm not claiming to have recognized you straight away. I was frantically Googling all of these things. Were these just for fun to reward exploration, or are these particular like pet interests of yours, or is there like a broader thematic point to the inclusion of these references?
Yeah, actually, we kind of had the same experience as you, because it's something that comes from our writer Dominic Wolfinger, and yeah, it's mostly to reward exploration. Yeah, he chose these very specific topics that he thought would fit very well.
I think it's also quite funny how it came to be that when we created this block-out version of the story, we created lots of placeholder assets and some room decorations just to hint at what the scenery would be. And we copy-pasted a lot of books just to have some objects around in some places. And eventually we thought, are we going to remove or replace some? Because there needs to be some content in there, like so they have a reason to be in the level at all. And I think Dominic really just liked to write content for all of these books, and we were quite surprised how many he managed to write these little snippets for.
So we've covered like some like broad general topics there, which I hope justify getting into a few sort of silly ones now. Did you have any particular favourite secret interactions in the game, ones that are off the beaten track? Feel free to hint at these if you don't want to spoil anything. But I think that's one of like the most fun parts of the game is just exploring, experimenting, and finding what you can do in this environment. Are there any particular favourites that you put in the game?
I would say for me there are a few flying objects, and some are less obvious than others. But I do really enjoy these, and especially when players figure out that they can possess some of these. It's a really cool moment.
I mean, it's not really hidden, but I really appreciated it when I've seen people playing the game and laughing about the "this one goes into the square hole" joke at the beginning of the baby level.
Very good. We will start to draw us to a close now. I think it's always nice to ask people, what are you playing at the moment? Is there anything in particular that you are enjoying?
I really enjoyed Time Flies, which came out in late July. It's also a short, more puzzly, I'd say, but also explorative adventure where you also play over the course of a lifetime, this time of a fly, and you only got like a minute or so to experiment in the room that you're in and find secrets. It's really enjoyable.
Yeah, I've been meaning to check that out. If I may ask, what was the lifespan of your fly?
I picked random countries each time I played.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool.
I also played it this week, and I think I picked Switzerland, where we're from, and there it was like 83 seconds. So I think it's kind of an easy mode.
Yeah, you have to choose the healthiest country to have the best experience with that game. Is there anything else you've been playing, Tim, that you've enjoyed recently?
So something that's sitting in my Steam library is Despelote. I'm really looking forward to finally find the time to play it. Something different was Sol Cesto that I really enjoyed, like a roguelike with a really distinct illustrative art style that I had a lot of fun with.
Three narrative games. That's very interesting. That you can see that consistency with your work. One question that I'd like to ask, which feels bad to ask because we want to focus on Henry Halfhead and what you are currently doing. We need to celebrate that, but I'm just curious, what is next for you? What's next for Lululu Entertainment? Do you have a next project that you are working on?
Say next is Holiday.
Fair enough. Well observed.
Yeah, we started with some brainstorming, but it's very early on.
But we're all very keen on creating something new.
Hmm.
That is nice to hear. I'll be very keen to see where you go next and what you come up with. Tim and Aaron, thank you very much for talking to me today. It's been very interesting, and I love hearing about the backstory behind Henry Halfhead, behind Henry and his journey. So lastly, is there anything that you would like to point listeners to in terms of how they can support you or ways that they can engage with you online?
I would say you can support us best by getting Henry Halfhead, playing it, and review it, and join our Discord and share your experience from the game. That is always very lovely to hear.
If you really like the soundtrack of the game, that one's also available on Steam and on Bandcamp. And we'll forward all the proceedings to the composer, Lucien Guy Montandon, who really did a great job.
I can imagine that in the Discord, I would love to see the artworks that people have created in the game. I think I will be joining that. I can imagine, people's creations in the school chapter will be eye-opening. Tim and Aaron, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for having us.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It was a lovely chat.
My thanks once more to Tim and Aaron for their time. The story of Henry Halfhead. We touched on it in the interview, and I skirted around it in the review earlier. But we should focus on it now, in closing. In the game, Henry grows and ages. You enjoy the innocence of youth together, endure the indignities of a day job together, face the growing limitations of age together. It's one last testament to the craft of the game design here that, in one late game section, Lululu implement some logical obstructions that you are able to overcome by virtue of how well they have taught you to play. And, neatly, that's the message. Don't forget how to play. Don't forget how to have fun. This is a game about play that has something to say. A silly sandbox with a sensitive soul. Half a head, but a whole heart. That's Henry Halfhead. Thanks for listening. All the music in the show was from the Henry Halfhead original soundtrack, composed by Lucien Guy Montandon, which you can find on Bandcamp or Steam. You can find everything you need in the show notes for this episode, which is linked in the episode description. The artwork for Dialogue Tree was produced by Pixel Benny, and you can find the show online at dialoguetree.cc. Talk to you next time.